Okay, The Studio is a show on Apple TV that I believe just concluded its first season, assuming there's going to be a second one, done by the one and only Seth Rogen. Now, here's the thing about this show. I started watching it a while ago, and I'm usually late to the party when I do my rants. And by the time I think I had watched the first episode, I think the last episode was already there. So I basically just decided to watch the whole thing and then basically report on it as a whole. And on the whole, this series is very, very good. And it's one that is definitely made for people like me that like film or television and stuff like that, but constantly see the glaring bad things about it. And the studio, I think, goes out of its way to show you why these things kind of happen. It goes out of the way to show you a studio head, which is what Seth Rogen's character is. Apparently, he wanted to do a show about somebody who was head of a studio, because normally when you see a show about Hollywood, it's usually told from the point of view of an up-and-coming writer or something like that. And there's always this power broker, sort of powers that be organization around it that is there to tell the writer no and stuff like that. And the writer has to usually prove themselves. In this case, they're telling the point of view from the guys who are the ones that have to say the no and stuff like that. The guys that are just sort of in it for the money. And on the very first episode, titled The Promotion, and I'll try and talk about these episodes as I go in the 10 minutes I have. Basically Seth Rogen's character, Matt Remick, receives a promotion from the former studio head to take over. And apparently this studio head before him got the rights to Kool-Aid, and he wants to make a film about Kool-Aid for some reason. Because apparently, I think he thinks it's like the next Barbie movie or something like that. It's a ridiculous idea, but of course, Matt Remick has to sort of take it. And at first, he wants to get Martin Scorsese, legendary filmmaker, to do it. But Scorsese, of course, wants to do the whole thing about Jonestown, which featured Kool-Aid poisoning everybody. And so it's kind of funny how essentially Matt Remick has to buy the idea from Scorsese and just to shelve it, just to wreck it. Because he's doing this film about Kool-Aid Man, and they actually have a scene where somebody draws out a plot for a Kool-Aid Man movie, and I'm going like, that sounds like something that Hollywood would do, and that's just nuts. Then there's this one episode after that that's simply called The Runner, or The Oneer, which is just so great because it basically is done in one take. And this is actually kind of something that the studio does, which I like. Every episode feels very unique, but there is a lot of great camera work. Like the camera will follow the characters as they walk around through offices and stuff like that, which I think is done really well. And even as they go through sets and stuff like that. So it's very good direction, I must say. And it just definitely creates a good, tense tone for the show that I really like, that's both funny and can be pretty dramatic at the same time. And basically on the show, or on this episode, Matt Remick and his buddy Sal decide to show up for this director who's doing a oneer. And if you're not familiar with the oneer, it's just basically just the camera goes, it's all done in one take. Very difficult shots to do. And their presence there actually screws it up several times, and they don't get the shot that day, which I think is pretty funny. Then there's a great episode just simply called The Note, which is where the Matt Remick has to preview this film by Ron Howard. But the film has this long, drawn-out scene at the end that they know they've got to cut. But no one wants to tell the great Ron Howard that they have to cut this scene. I like this scene. I actually thought this was a really well done episode, and apparently Matt Remick once gave a note to Ron Howard about the movie The Beautiful Mind that was a really stinker note, really bad opinion, and so he's forced to have to do it again. I actually really enjoyed this episode. And then they did this other episode, which I have to admit wasn't exactly the best episode, but wasn't the worst, but it was definitely going out of its way to be very different. The episode is called The Missing Reel, and it feels like an episode. It's a very much purposeful noir sort of look to it, and it sort of makes fun of the noir genre by kind of doing this sort of thing where even Matt Remick is sort of doing this voiceover thing through it, and he's saying like it's passed off as like his like therapy in the movie or something like that. but it's pretty hysterical, and I have to admit, it's actually pretty good. You maybe should see it. Now, there's an episode called The War, which I have to admit, I had a hard time watching. And I want to get into something like this because I'm going to be ranting upon another series that's very similar to this called Hacks. But if you've noticed, anytime you're watching any Hollywood production where they have to turn the camera around and show the nature of the Hollywood business, it is always shown as being a very toxic atmosphere run by divas. And they really go out of their way to show this on the studio. In fact, I think the thing that makes the studio different is the fact that we are seeing those divas. And in this case, they actually focus on one of the, I guess, helpers of this thing. Her name's Quinn, and how she's trying to get something done, but she can't get it done because Sal is blocking her, and how they just have this huge fight between them. And it is just like seeing kids squabble. It is absolutely immature. And I think that's really the point of this thing. And unfortunately, it really offers no answers of any type, and maybe it's not really supposed to. Now, this one episode called The Pediatric Oncologist, this is a really good episode because it definitely shows, because Matt Remick is dating somebody who's a doctor, and it seems like it's a good relationship, but when she takes him to one of these doctor functions, it feels very, I don't know how to describe it, very elitist and stuff like that. And these doctors are basically looking down on Matt Remick as a studio head because all he does is just make movies, which they see as sort of a trivial organization. And Matt Remick comes to their defense, and a defense that I actually think is very good. And I'm kind of going like, and this sort of, I actually kind of like this episode because it sort of has a meta narrative about the importance of film and stuff like that, and stuff like, and fantasy in a real world. Then there's that episode Casting where they just basically look at their cast of Kool-Aid Man and they're so afraid it's going to come across as racist. And I think it's very indicative of our culture as far as what goes on there. And that's all I'm going to say about this episode. And now the episode, The Golden Globes, I really thought was very interesting. If you've seen any award shows, you always think this is so self-congratulatory. And this episode really kind of focuses on that. The idea of this aspect of how Matt Remick just has to be thanked for this, for his contribution to Zoe Kravitz's movie, and he wants her to thank him, and he goes out of his way to make sure he gets thanked. The fact that she's about to thank him, and then the sound gets cut off, that really ruins his night. But it really shouldn't ruin his night. He actually had a really good night, and I think that's kind of funny about how this character really accepts this sort of thing. Now, I'm going to talk about the last two episodes because they are essentially one story. And I didn't really like these. I actually have to say these episodes are not very good. But basically what happens is the group goes to CinemaCon, which is apparently this big sort of, I don't know, it's almost like a movie-oriented kind of Comic-Con thing. And I get the feeling like maybe they were going for that. I don't know. But it's in Las Vegas. And they throw a party with lots of drugs. Now, this is something that I don't really know about personally as far as the whole drug culture goes. And I always figured, like, I always wondered how this whole illegal drug culture can stay under the radar of Hollywood, and sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I think Matt Remick wants to throw his party where he has like actual, he's got shrooms laced in chocolate and stuff like that at the table. And the old studio head, played by Bryan Cranston, who I think that's the first time I've ever mentioned it, mentions that he believes that their studio is going to be bought by Amazon, and naturally that gets everybody upset. So they want to make this great presentation. But the problem is everybody's so stoned as heck on their drugs they had the previous night that they're not going to be able to make the best of presentation. But then it all kind of comes together at the end, and then it just sort of becomes this sort of weird kind of extemporaneous presentation that gets the audience cheering. And I have to admit, there's the scene at the end where essentially, like, Bryan Cranston's character is so stoned, all they can just say is just movies. And then so they sort of use it as sort of like a rallying cry, like, okay, say movies back. And at the end, the crowd is like saying movies, movies, movies. And there's a really good close-up in the end of Seth Rogen's character where you realize, like, this shouldn't work, but it kind of is. And I think that's kind of what it's talking about, the love of film and stuff like that. This is a good show. You should watch it if you